At my wife's 45th wedding anniversary dinner, surrounded by family and the soft glow of candlelight, my 11-year-old granddaughter slipped her hand into mine under the table and whispered, "Grandpa, don't let them make you sign anything tonight. Please." I thought she was nervous about the speeches. Maybe the formal restaurant made her anxious. But when she pressed a folded napkin into my palm with a 4-digit number written on it and mouthed the words, "Check my tablet," I felt something cold move through my chest. That had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I'm so glad you're here with me right now. What I'm about to tell you happened on a Saturday evening in September at Harborview Grill in Savannah, Georgia. Where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's with me as I take you back to that table. My wife Dorothy looked beautiful that night. She always does. 63 years old, and she still walks into a room the way she did when I first saw her at a church social in 1979. She wore the pearl earrings I gave her on our 20th anniversary, and a blue dress she'd bought specifically for tonight. 45 years. We raised 2 children in a 3-bedroom house in Savannah. We buried a dog, weathered 2 hurricanes, and paid off that house 17 years ago. It sits on Abercorn Street, 4 blocks from Forsyth Park, and it is worth, according to the last appraisal, somewhere close to $720,000. Our son Martin arranged the dinner. He'd booked the private dining room, ordered a custom cake, invited 12 people including Dorothy's sister Faye, our daughter Rebecca, who flew in from Cincinnati, and Martin's wife Claudine. I remember thinking it was unusually generous of him. Martin is not a generous man by nature. He's careful with money the way a surgeon is careful with a scalpel. Precise, deliberate, never wasteful. So when he called 3 weeks before and said he wanted to handle everything, the whole dinner, the cake, the wine, no expense spared, I felt something I couldn't name. I told myself I was being ungrateful. Our granddaughter Lily sat 2 seats down from me. She is Martin and Claudine's daughter, 11 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness. She'd been quieter than usual all evening. She barely touched her pasta, while the adults talked and laughed around the long table. I noticed her watching her parents with an expression I'd never seen on a child's face before. Not boredom, not impatience, something more like dread. Martin stood and tapped his wine glass with a spoon. He gave a toast. He talked about family, about legacy, about how much he admired Dorothy and me. He used the word sacrifice 4 times. He talked about the future. He talked about making sure we were taken care of. Claudine smiled throughout the whole speech with the kind of smile that doesn't involve the eyes. Dessert arrived. That's when Lily pressed the napkin into my hand. I excused myself to use the restroom. In the hallway outside the private dining room, I found her tablet in the coat check where she'd told me it would be, tucked beneath her small jacket. The passcode from the napkin worked. I opened it and found a voice memo she'd labeled simply, "Dad and Mom." Sunday. 3 days before the dinner. I stood in that hallway for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I know the exact time because I checked my watch when I pressed play and again when I stopped. The voices were clear. Martin first, then Claudine, then Martin again. She already signed the financial POA, the one from Dr. Henson's office. She thinks it's for Medicare supplemental enrollment. And the house? It goes to us under the trust amendment. She signed it the same day. Gerald walked her through it at the kitchen table, while I kept Dad busy in the garage. What about your father? He's not on the deed. Never was. The house was in Dorothy's name only since her mother left it to her in 2009. He has no legal standing to contest anything. How long before we can list it? Gerald says 60 days after placement. Once she's at Magnolia Terrace and the cognitive assessment is on file, we move. And the assessment? A pause. Then Claudine's voice, lower, deliberate. Dr. Henson owes Gerald a favor. He'll document what we need him to document. He's done it before. Martin, your mother is sharp as a tack, and we both know it. That's why the timeline has to move tonight. Gerald is bringing the final trust amendment to the dinner. We get both signatures before dessert is cleared. What if she reads it? She won't. You hand it to her after the champagne toast, right after your speech. Gerald presents it as the anniversary gift documentation. A legacy trust, something sweet. She'll sign. And if she asks questions, a long pause. Then we remind her about the episode at Kroger last month. the one we've been telling people about. I pressed stop. There was no episode at Kroger. Dorothy went to Kroger every Tuesday. She knew every cashier by name. She came home from that particular Tuesday with the exact right items on a list she'd written herself, reorganized by aisle to save time, the way she'd been doing since 1987. I stood in that hallway holding a child's tablet, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, and I understood three things very clearly. First, my son had been planning this long enough that there was a lawyer named Gerald already involved. Second, Dorothy had already signed documents she didn't understand. Third, somewhere at that table right now, a man named Gerald was either already seated or was about to walk through the door with papers for my wife to sign. I called my daughter Rebecca. She answered on the second ring. I kept my voice low and even. I told her what I'd heard. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, are you sure?" I said I was. She said, "Don't go back in there yet. Give me 2 minutes." I heard her chair push back from the table through the phone, then footsteps, then a door. I went back to the coat check. I set the tablet exactly where I'd found it, under the jacket, same angle, same position. I straightened my tie in the mirror at the end of the hallway. My hands were not steady, but my face was. That surprised me. When I walked back into the private dining room, a man I didn't recognize was seated in the empty chair that had been between Rebecca and Dorothy's sister Faye. He was mid-50s, dark suit, the kind of confident posture that belongs to men who spend their lives in rooms where other people are nervous. He was talking to Dorothy, and she was laughing at something he'd said. He had a leather portfolio on the table in front of him. Martin caught my eye as I sat down. He smiled. I smiled back. Gerald, it turned out, was Martin's estate attorney, Gerald Forsyth. Martin introduced him as a surprise, a family friend who'd prepared something very special for the occasion. A legacy document, Martin said, something to protect Dorothy and me, to make sure our wishes were honored, to ensure the house and everything we'd built stayed in the family. Dorothy pressed her hand to her heart and said that was the most thoughtful thing she'd ever heard. I looked at Rebecca across the table. She gave the smallest possible nod. Lily was watching me with the stillness of someone much older. I picked up my wine glass. I said, "Gerald, before we get to any documents, I'd love to hear about your practice. How long have you been doing estate law?" It was a simple question, the kind a curious father-in-law asks. Gerald smiled and began to answer, and while he talked, I watched Claudine's hand drift to her handbag twice. I watched Martin check his phone under the table. I watched Dorothy admire the leather portfolio the way she admires anything that looks official and important, with the trusting openness of someone who has never been cheated by the people she loved most. Rebecca excused herself to use the restroom. She did not come back for 11 minutes. When she returned, she sat down, placed her napkin in her lap, and poured herself a glass of water. She looked at me and gave the same small nod as before, and this time there was something else in it. Relief, or the beginning of it. Gerald opened the portfolio and withdrew a document, maybe 12 pages, and slid it across the table toward Dorothy with a gold pen. Martin was already speaking, warm and practiced, about legacy and love and the beauty of 45 years together. Claudine was watching Dorothy's hands. Dorothy picked up the pen. I said, "Sweetheart, before you sign that, I need to show you something." The table went quiet. Martin's voice sharpened immediately. "Dad, it's a formality. It's just Dorothy." I kept my eyes on my wife. "Can we step outside for just a moment? Just the two of us." She looked at me. 45 years of marriage means you can read a person's face the way you read weather coming in off the water. She saw something in mine. She set the pen down. "Of course," she said. Martin was on his feet. "Dad, this is completely unnecessary. Gerald has an appointment after." "Sit down, Martin." I said it the way I'd said it when he was 16 and I'd caught him lying about where he'd been. He sat. Dorothy and I walked out onto the restaurant's patio overlooking the river. The September air was warm and thick with salt. String lights ran along the railing. She turned to face me and I told her everything. I told her about Lily and the napkin. I told her about the tablet in the coat check. I told her what I'd heard. I told her what I'd heard about Magnolia Terrace and Dr. Henson and Gerald Forsyth and the 60-day timeline. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, The papers at Dr. Henson's office. I thought they were. I know. Martin was with me. He said. I know what he said. She gripped the railing with both hands. The river was dark and slow below us. My mother's house, she said quietly. Harold, I've lived in that house since I was 4 years old. I know. He used his own daughter. She didn't say it like a question. She said it like something settling into place, the last piece of something she hadn't wanted to finish. He sent Lily to that dinner, knowing she'd heard. He brought her along and she heard everything, and he had no idea what she would do with it. She knew exactly what to do with it. Dorothy closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were dry. What did Rebecca do while she was in the restroom? She called the Savannah PD non-emergency line and a contact she has at the Georgia Secretary of State's office. She also photographed every document in Gerald's portfolio while he was distracted talking to you. She went to the coat room, took the tablet, and sent the audio file to her own email from Lily's account before she came back. Dorothy almost smiled. She's faster than I give her credit for. She gets it from you. We stood there another minute. Below us, a boat moved slowly up the river, running lights blinking red and green. Then Dorothy straightened. She smoothed her dress. She touched her pearl earrings once. All right, she said. Let's go back in. What happened next took less time than I expected, which is often how things go when they've been building for months. 2 officers arrived at the restaurant within 20 minutes. Plainclothes, which the manager had quietly facilitated after Rebecca's call. They sat at the bar with drinks they didn't touch. Gerald Forsythe, it turned out, had a filing problem. Rebecca had photographed enough of his portfolio to identify 3 separate documents bearing Dorothy's signature on pages she had never seen, including a trust amendment that predated tonight by 6 weeks, signed, according to the document, at our kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon, notarized by a woman named Patricia Dunn, whose commission, when checked, had expired 4 months prior. A forged notarization. When Detective Lori Ashford stepped into the private dining room and identified herself, Gerald Forsythe's face did something complicated. Martin went very still. Claudine stood up and immediately said, "We were trying to protect his parents," and Detective Ashford said, "Ma'am, please sit down," and she sat. Dorothy's sister Faye had not moved from her seat. She'd been watching the whole thing unfold with the careful attention of someone taking inventory. Later, she told me she'd suspected something was wrong for weeks, since Martin had called her asking questions about Dorothy's inheritance from their mother, and whether Faye had any claim to the property. She said she'd thought it was odd. She hadn't known what to do with odd. Lily sat in the far corner of the room, with her hands folded in her lap. When the officers began speaking with Martin and Claudine, she looked at me across the table. I walked over and sat next to her. She was trembling slightly, the way you tremble when the adrenaline runs out. "You did the right thing," I said. She didn't answer for a moment. Then, "Is my dad going to go to jail?" I didn't lie to her. "I don't know yet. That depends on a lot of things. He's still my dad." "I know he is. But Grandma is my grandma." She looked at her hands, and she didn't do anything wrong. No, she didn't. Willie nodded once, slowly, like someone completing a calculation they'd been working on for days. 11 years old, and she had already learned something it takes most people a lifetime to understand or never understand at all. That loving someone and protecting what's right are not always the same action. And when they conflict, you have to choose. The investigation that followed took 4 months and reached further than any of us had anticipated. Gerald Forsythe, it emerged, had been running what investigators eventually described as an elder estate exploitation network. He had 17 documented clients across Chatham County. In each case, the pattern was nearly identical. An adult child with financial pressure, a sympathetic attorney who knew which physicians owed him favors, a nursing home with a quiet arrangement, and paperwork assembled with enough legal language to intimidate anyone who tried to challenge it. Dr. Stenentrain. Henson had written cognitive assessments for at least 9 individuals. None of the 9, according to independent neurological evaluations obtained during the investigation, had demonstrated meaningful cognitive decline at the time of their assessments. Every one of them had been placed in facilities within 90 days of signing documents they believed were insurance forms or Medicare paperwork. One of them was a retired federal judge named Clarence Odom, 78 years old, who had been in Sunrise Memory Gardens for 7 months when we found him. He had a degree from Yale Law, 40 years on the bench, and had published 3 books on constitutional procedure. He was sitting in a room with a television he hadn't turned on in weeks, writing letters to anyone who might listen. None of them had been mailed. The facility had a policy about residents posting their own correspondence. Dorothy read about him in the case files Detective Ashford shared with us, and did not sleep that night. The next morning, she called Rebecca and said, "We need to get him out." That became the work, the thing that gave Dorothy's anger somewhere to go, which I think saved her in ways I'm still understanding. We connected with a legal aid attorney in Savannah named Patricia Osei, who had been working elder exploitation cases for 11 years and who cried briefly when we came to her office with everything we had. Not from sadness, she told us, from the relief of finally having something solid enough to build on. Judge Odin was the first. His placement was reversed after an independent evaluation confirmed what the letters he'd been writing had been saying for 7 months. He moved to a small apartment near his daughter in Bluffton, South Carolina, who had believed the facility's assurances that her father needed full-time memory care. She'd been calling twice a week. She had been told he was comfortable but confused, and that too much outside stimulation was counterproductive to his treatment. She'd believed them because she trusted doctors. We began visiting the others. Arthur Simmons, 71, a retired high school football coach from Statesboro, sharp and funny and furious, who had been separated from his truck, his dog, and his woodworking shop by a son who had gambling debts that made Dorothy's house look modest. He beat me at checkers 4 times the first afternoon we visited and said, "Took you long enough," before we'd even explained why we were there. Miriam Delacroix, 84. A former librarian from Brunswick who still requested specific books by IBN number and was given picture books by well-meaning staff who had never asked what she liked to read. She wept when Dorothy brought her a copy of Middlemarch and said she'd been asking for it for 3 months. Lily came with us to visit Miriam. She sat next to the old woman and listened to her talk about books for an hour without checking her phone once. On the drive home, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, she was a librarian. She spent her whole life giving people books, and nobody would give her one. "No," Dorothy said from the passenger seat. "They wouldn't. That's not right." "No, sweetheart, it isn't." Lily looked out the window. "I want to be a lawyer, I think. Or maybe a judge, someone who can actually fix it." She was 11 years old. The trial was held in February, on a Tuesday, in a Chatham County courtroom that was standing room only by 9 in the morning. Families of other victims, advocates, a reporter from the Savannah Morning News, and 2 from Atlanta. Several of the freed individuals sat in the gallery, including Judge Odom, who wore his best suit and sat in the front row with his daughter's hand in his. Gerald Forsyth was sentenced to 22 years on federal conspiracy and elder fraud charges, with additional state charges bringing his total exposure to what his own attorney described, with visible defeat, as career-ending. His network had processed nearly $4.1 million in assets across the 17 cases. Dr. Henson received an 11-year sentence and permanent revocation of his medical license. He had been practicing for 26 years. Martin received 18 years. He was eligible for parole consideration after 12. When Judge Patricia Hartley read the sentence, Martin did not look at Dorothy. He looked at the floor. He looked at me once, briefly, and then away. I don't know what he was looking for. I'm not sure he knew either. Claudine received 14 years. Before sentencing, Dorothy addressed the court. She spoke for 6 minutes. She did not cry. She talked about trust, about what it means to sign your name to something because the person handing you the pen is someone who called you Mom. She talked about the 17 families. She talked about Lily. "My granddaughter is 11 years old," she said. She sat at a dinner table and understood that the people she loved most were doing something wrong, and she chose to stop it at a cost she is still paying. No child should have to make that choice. No parent should put their child in the position of choosing between love and decency. My son did, and my granddaughter chose decency. I am more proud of her than I have words for, and I am more heartbroken about the reason than I will ever fully be able to say. The courtroom was quiet. Lily, seated between Rebecca and me, reached over and took her grandmother's hand when Dorothy returned to her seat. She held it for the rest of the proceedings. 6 months after the verdict, Dorothy and I are still in the house on Abercorn Street. The documents Martin and Gerald had prepared were voided. The trust amendment was expunged. The power of attorney was revoked. Patricia Osei and her team worked through all of it methodically, the way you work through damage after a storm, room by room, wall by wall, until you can see what's structural and what's just debris. We established a fund through the Savannah Community Foundation named for Dorothy's mother, who left her that house, and who Dorothy thinks about every time she walks up the front steps. The fund supports legal aid for elder exploitation cases and independent evaluations for anyone in the county whose placement is being contested. 7 cases are active right now. 3 more are being reviewed. Lily comes over on Saturdays. She's been doing that since November. She helps Dorothy in the garden. And then we sit on the porch and talk about whatever she wants to talk about. Some weeks, it's school. Some weeks, it's what she read. A few weeks ago, she asked me whether I thought her father would be different when he came out. I thought about it for a while. I told her honestly that I didn't know, that people can change, that I hoped he would, and that his chances were better if she didn't give up on him entirely, but also didn't wait for him to become someone he might not choose to become. She thought about that. Then she said, "I'm going to write him a letter, but I'm not going to send it yet. I'll keep it, and if he does the work, I'll send it." I said that sounded exactly right. She nodded, picked up her book, started reading. She keeps the letters from her father unopened in a box in her room. Maybe someday she has time. I want to be honest with you about something. I spent a long time after all of this, wondering if I had missed signs I should have caught. Martin's questions about the house, his sudden interest in Dorothy's finances after her mother passed, the way he started calling more often in the year before, checking in, asking about doctors and appointments, saying he just wanted to make sure we were okay. I had thought it was maturity. I had thought he was finally becoming the son I'd hoped he'd grow into. I had been wrong, and I had been wrong in the most painful way available to a parent. I had mistaken calculation for love. So here is what I want to leave you with. If your children or someone close to you shows sudden renewed interest in your finances, in your property, in your medical situation, pay attention. Not paranoid attention. Careful attention. Know what you are signing before you sign it. Call your own attorney, not the one they recommend. Call a different doctor if someone suggests you need evaluating. And if an 11-year-old girl hands you a folded napkin at a dinner table and writes a passcode on it, trust her. Lily saved Dorothy's life. Not her physical life, the life she'd built. The house her mother left her, her name on her own documents, her freedom to decide where she sleeps and what she reads and who brings her coffee in the morning. The life that belongs to her. One child's courage did that. One child who understood that protecting someone sometimes means standing between them and the people you love most. If this story reached you, if it sounds like something you've seen or something you fear, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And comment below. Tell me where you are and what time it is. I still want to know who's listening, because you being here matters. It mattered to Dorothy, it matters to Lily, and it might matter to someone you haven't thought of yet. Someone sitting in a beige room right now, waiting for a visitor who isn't coming. We're coming. We're still coming.